Hello, thank you for listening to my presentation called Students' Plurilingual Identities, Development and Negotiations. This study is based in my dissertation called School Experience of Plurilingual Students, a multiple case study from Iceland. My supervisors were Professor Hanna Ragnarsdóttir from the University of Iceland and Professor Lars Anders Gulbrandstad from the University of Hedmark in Norway. In this study, I highlight the research on linguistic identities, the analysis of plurilingual students' language portraits, and the students' negotiations of their linguistic identities and the development of plurilingual identities. I will present 5 cases of successful plurilingual students on mid-level of compulsory schools who attend community heritage language schools on weekends and whose parents pursue strong family language policies. Now, these 5 students were born in Iceland to 2 foreign parents. Iceland has long been isolated, an island in the North Atlantic Ocean, but it has quickly become a multilingual society. The immigration started to increase in the early 1990s, and this multilingualism is now reflected in the classrooms in preschools, compulsory schools, and upper secondary schools. Icelandic and Icelandic Sign Language are the official languages. English, Danish, and Nordic languages have very high status. English, Danish are taught in the schools. Usually Spanish, French, German would be taught as foreign languages at the lower secondary level and then in the upper secondary school. If the students have mother tongues Swedish, Norwegian or Polish, they can study them as a part of the educational system. But in total there are over 100 community and immigrant languages in Iceland. One of the goals for the plurilingual students in Iceland is to become active bilinguals in Icelandic and their heritage languages. Language is a phenomenon that both shapes and expresses an individual's identity. Linguistic repertoires available to plurilingual speakers at each time provide the speakers with tools to express and negotiate their multiple identities. Plurilingual students can negotiate their identities, select which parts they conceal and which they demonstrate. Students can express their linguistic identity or connection with the language through expertise, affiliation, and inheritance. They express their language expertise by reference to the quality and quantity of their knowledge of the language. For example, they say, "I speak very good Icelandic." They express their affiliation with the language by saying that they like or dislike certain language, or by formal and informal connections with that language. And the inheritance is expressed through the connection of the language and people, such as family and friends. Learning a language relates to assuming new identities, especially when a heritage language or the second language, the language of the society, is concerned. However, assuming multiple identities also involves challenges in establishing a coherent sense of oneself, some struggle and tensions. Relationships of power in the social world affect learners' access to target language communities, and the construction of the identities and relationships and interactions can be affected by the varying power relationships. These were the research questions of the larger research, but today we are going to look at the questions on the sub-question, what do plurilingual students report on their use of their linguistic repertoire? The key concepts in the study were these. Plurilingual students have varied skills in their languages. The languages in an individual linguistic repertoire are equal in the sense that they have purpose and relevance for the individual, And I use the term plurilingual student to refer to students who speak their heritage language with their parents, Icelandic at school, and who use their linguistic repertoires in multiple ways. Linguistic repertoire of an individual contains all languages and language varieties of a person. An individual can learn several languages to varying degrees and use them for different purposes. She is a social agent who activates each language based on her experience according to circumstances. The linguistic repertoire keeps changing over the lifespan. Plurilingualism is the ability to draw on and activate the integrated, interrelated, unevenly distributed linguistic repertoire and use it for communication and mediation. It is a lively and complex social and personal process that includes cultural, social, cognitive, and academic aspects of the language, and it is valuable to individuals and societies. Theoretical framework of the larger study was quite extensive, but today we are focusing on research on linguistic identities. Linguistic identity is here understood as the relationship between the self and the means of communication. And to express this relationship, people, students, can employ these categories of expertise, affiliation, and inheritance. The research was qualitative, socio-constructivist study, 5 cases in a multiple case study. The students were aged 9 to 12. The interviews were analyzed with thematic analysis, but today we are focusing on the analysis of the language portraits that the students drew as part of the data collection. As a researcher, I was both an insider and an outsider and co-constructed the meanings. In the case of language portraits, I was the one who gave students the instruction how to draw the portraits. I was the one who was asking the questions about it. I was the one, of course, who analyzed and interpreted the data. And as any research with children and with sensitive groups, I needed to take good care to consider all the ethical rules for research. The students are in no way representative of all plurilingual students in Iceland or in any other location. They were so-called balanced bilinguals. They had very good knowledge of both their heritage languages and the school language in most cases, and this is not representative of the overall population of plurilingual children. Here is quickly a graphic depiction of a case. The student is always in the middle, 2 interviews, language portrait, and then I took interviews with the other people in the closest circle of the student, parents, heritage language teachers, and class teachers. Here are the students, their pseudonyms, their heritage languages, and their ages. And this is the body outline, the base for the language portraits. The student received this blank silhouette. They had color pencils, and they received the instruction to attach a color to each of their languages in their linguistic repertoire, to decide where in the body they would place the language and how large space they would attribute to the language. This is a creative task. It is a little bit of imaginative play, but the students were doing it really nicely, and the discussions about these language portraits are very fruitful, and they were in no contradiction with the results from the interviews. That means that there was a triangulation in a way, and that they really reflect the linguistic repertoires and the students' realities. Findings that we are looking at are mostly findings from the language portraits. Also in one case from an individual case. It's the question number 1, what do plurilingual students report on their use of their linguistic repertoire? Here I took the themes from individual cases to answer this question. And it was quite clear that the languages played multiple roles in the lives and studies of the students. Erag, the oldest one of the participants, was very aware of the importance of his languages for various purposes. He used them with ease, invested time into their learning. Martina used her Icelandic and Lithuanian effortlessly, continued to study them along with English, in harmony with the demands of her family and school. For Safira, reaching an age-appropriate level in Icelandic was the key to joining her peers in the general class, and at the same time she showed ambition to study her heritage language Thai, and she presented multiple languages as the symbolic key to friendships with her international friends. You will see this in her language portraits in a moment. Jackson's heritage language learning was regularly supported by his mother and his heritage language teacher. He showed high communicative competence in it. Clara was very communicative, and that reflected in her use of all her 3 languages. Out of the 5 students, Erag expressed most clearly his ideas about his current and expected future use of languages. In his language portrait, he gave an approximately same space to Icelandic in his feet, Albanian in his arms, and English in his chest. Danish, learned only a couple of hours a week at school, is placed in his head. He perceived his heritage language Albanian as useful only for social purposes, while Icelandic in his mind served both social and academic purposes. Erag expected more future use of Icelandic and English, while he expected Albanian and Danish to continue to have the same single use in the future. Erag's reported motivation to improve his competence in Icelandic and English was the strongest. The concept of the social use of language overlaps to some extent with Honk and Ganapathy's definition of integrative motivation for learning languages, or the desire to associate with a group, to socially belong and to integrate. The reported academic and professional use overlap with Honk and Ganapathy's concept of instrumental motivation, or learning the language for pragmatic reasons, grades or professional opportunities. Both instrumental and integrative motivation lead to language learning. Yet it seems that for Erag, a combination of both led to increased language learning. Erag, Martina, Safira, Jackson and Clara expressed their linguistic identities through their language portraits. They attributed the proportions of color surfaces in the portraits to their language expertise. So the larger the space, the more they used language. The location of the languages often referred to their personal connection with the languages. For example, if it's in the heart, then it's the dear language. Colors of languages had multiple associations. And displaying the languages in this way is highly symbolic, but it was in agreement with the interviews. What you can see, even if you can't read the titles of languages, is that students attributed approximately same space to their heritage languages and to the societal language Icelandic. So they were really plurilingual. Out of the 5 students, Safira showed most agency in learning languages and pursuing her goals. She made use of various learning spaces, people who could assist her, internet options. She had many international friends in the school with whom she spoke Icelandic and English. Yet they were also the ones who knew about her Thai identity, and she knew about their backgrounds. She learned a few words in her friends' languages, Turkish, Arabic, and Chinese. Since childhood she was very fond of Japan and its culture, and learned a few words in Japanese from YouTube. She attributed a large importance to English, so that she could speak with everybody in the world. Icelandic was a key to joining her peers in the general classroom, because at the time of the first interview she had to study separately in the international department of the school. At the time of the second interview she was already in the general classroom, where the learning and tests were more difficult, but she was very diligent to study all the time in her own, from her own initiative. She wanted to do well and to be a good student. Her class teacher, Paul, reported that she had a strong character. She was popular with her friends, unafraid to show her origin, for example by showing Thailand on a map in the classroom. In the future, Safira wanted to live in Iceland and become a teacher. So languages were closely related to her study, to her friendships, to her vision of future. She was very, very active in learning. Identity confirmation and empowerment of plurilingual students are necessary for their active engagement in schooling. Plurilingual students, especially older children and adolescents, experience tensions when they need to negotiate their plurilingual identities and belonging to two or more cultural worlds. The students in this study showed both agency and integrity in negotiating their participation in their educational and social spaces. They embraced their plurilingualism and plurilingual identities, and thus there was seemingly no reason for tensions between them and their parents, and them and their educators. However, there are some indications that these tensions existed. The students spoke very positively about all their languages. They developed strong plurilingual identities. They had certain linguistic needs that were not entirely respected in their compulsory schools nor in the heritage language schools. In these spaces, languages were mostly strictly separated. And what was interesting, really, that these identity negotiations took place all the time, but they were most prominent in the circumstances with like lowest power differences among friends. The choice was entirely up to the students. They negotiated the choice. A little bit less with the parents, because the parents had strict family language policies and they wanted to use heritage languages at home. Even less it was with the heritage language teachers, and the least negotiations, from what I could see from my data, was in the compulsory school settings. Obviously the power differences there were the largest. And conclusions. Students plurilingual is always active, also in monolingual situations. In order to approach all students holistically, inclusive multicultural schools need to recognize and affirm students' plurilingualism and their linguistic needs. This is also good for monolingual students in the classrooms to learn about various languages. It is good for bringing up plurilingual citizens. Valuing students' languages and their plurilingual identities enhances their school experience. Plurilingualism is an educational value. It's valuable to individuals and societies, and it should not be seen as a burden or a barrier to educational success, or a threat, or even a political divide. So, to conclude, I'm very thankful to all the funds and organizations that funded my research, and there's a long list of references. This is recorded, so You can stop, see the references when you view the recording. And thank you very much for your attention.